Hey, what's going on? It's your boy BT, and I came here to talk some boxing with the thousands of True School Sports subscribers. Now, today we're going to tackle a question that I think is a good question to tackle for our newer boxing fans, for our boxing fans that are just coming into this sport. Maybe they had a friend or a family member that put them onto boxing. Maybe they saw a big fight like Tyson Fury versus Wilder or something like that got them into the sport, and they don't exactly understand how boxing works or the structure of it, and it's a bit confusing. So I'm going to try to make these videos to help newer boxing fans, okay? Now, one question I've gotten from some of my own friends that aren't like hardcore boxing fans that don't quite follow the sport is why doesn't one question I've gotten a lot, and they usually ask this during Floyd Mayweather fights. They ask me, Brendan, doesn't being undefeated make you the best? Okay, and I think this is a great question because this for someone who's new for someone who's newer and doesn't understand how boxing works and how the business side can sometimes interfere with the actual sport, they may not understand this. So I'm going to do my best to tackle that in this video. Now, does being undefeated make you the best? Yes or no? The answer to that question is a resounding no. Being undefeated doesn't make you the best. So the argument that Floyd Mayweather is the best because he's undefeated just isn't true. Now, you can use other reasons to justify why you think Floyd Mayweather is the best boxer, and I think those would be more valid than him being undefeated. Because if you look at the history of boxing, the best fighters, if you look at the fighters that people generally regard as the best fighters of all time, your Muhammad Ali's, your Sugar Ray Leonard's, your Sam Langford's, your Harry Greb's, your Larry Holmes, your Pernell Whitaker's, your Rocky, not Rocky Marciano, but most of the great, like 99.999% of the best fighters who ever lived, Manny Pacquiao as well, who ever lived, they took a loss. And then you might ask the question as a new boxing fan, well, if they were so good, then why did they lose? Great question. Well, in boxing is a one-on-one sport, and a lot of times a boxer has a certain style that he fights. You might have a guy who is a pure boxer, a guy that likes to stay on his back foot, has a good jab, knows how to control the distance and not get hit too much, and he's not boxing you to knock you out, he's boxing you to get a points decision. You see what I'm saying? You might have a guy who's a straight knockout artist that doesn't have the boxing skills of a Floyd Mayweather, and he's going there in there to beat you up soundly and knock you out. And then you might have a guy that's got a bit of both. And maybe that guy who's a boxer puncher, as we call him in boxing, maybe that guy who's a boxer and a puncher at the same time, maybe he doesn't like to fight on the inside. Fighters always have a weakness. So no matter how good you think you are, there's always going to be a fighter that could be your kryptonite. It doesn't matter how good you are. You see what I'm saying? So that's why I'm saying, like, if you fight enough styles, if you fight enough styles and you fight enough good people back to back to back, somewhere along the way, whether it be in the ring or maybe by bad judging, you're going to take a loss. So there's no shame in taking a loss, and there's definitely no shame in losing to a better man, just so long as you put your best foot forward and fought the best available competition available to you. You should get the respect you deserve in boxing, okay? So being undefeated does make you the best. It does make you the best because a lot of times too, what winds up happening is boxing, the business, interferes with the sport. And the guys that manage the careers of certain fighters, they might keep them away from a particular style of fighter because that style of opponent isn't conducive to the fighter they have under management, and they want to keep that guy undefeated as long as possible. So I'll give you an example, right? I'll give you an example of this in boxing, a couple actually, all right? Right now, one of the biggest names in boxing is a guy named Canelo Alvarez. If you're a new boxing fan, you may have heard of him. He's a very big name, exceptionally talented fighter, has done really well for himself in the sport of boxing. Been in big championship fights and won, right? Canelo Alvarez is a great fighter. He's fought all kinds of styles. He's fought fighters like Gennady Golovkin, who are, I would say boxer punchers, guys that can box first, but also have devastating knockout power. He's fought people like Daniel Jacobs, who are kind of like, slick boxers. A guy who's a slick boxer doesn't have elite power, but respectable power. He's fought the likes of Floyd Mayweather, who you consider an all-around complete fighter. A boxer, technician, a craftsman, a master scientist of the sweet science of boxing. That's what Floyd Mayweather is. You know, there's all kinds of styles he's fought. You know, he also fought a guy named Arizmendi Lara. You know, a southpaw, meaning that he just jabs with his right. If you don't know what that is, it means you jab with your right hand. A southpaw that you know, was very skillful. You know, punches from different kind of angles. Because he's a southpaw. Most fighters are orthodox fighters, mean that they jab with their left hand. Their lead hand is their left hand, and their backhand is the right hand. Where they hit you, the hard punch they're really throwing are with the right hand. You know, whether it be the uppercut or the right hook. You know, but Arizmendi Lara, because he's a southpaw, he's throwing punches from different angles. Because most fighters aren't a southpaw, so sometimes a fighter can have a hard time adjusting to this. And you know, ever since he fought Lara, it was a very close fight. Canelo won a very close decision. And since that fight, he hasn't really fought any top southpaws in his weight class. You know, and there's been a lot of good name fighters who are southpaw in his weight division, in his weight category that he could have fought, like Billy Joe Saunders, like a guy named Demetrius Andrade. These guys are some of the best fighters in his weight class, and they just happen to be southpaws. And Canelo hasn't fought that kind of style since he fought Arizmendi Lara. So that's what I'm saying. Sometimes a boxer's record, it's not fixed, but it can be manipulated due to very good and careful management. You know, careful management of not fighting a certain style ever, or good careful management of not fighting fighters when they're at their best. You know, when they're in their prime, when their mental and physical abilities meet up at its highest point, which is what they call a fighter's prime. You know, that's how a fighter's record can get manipulated. You see what I'm saying? You know, I'm not gonna lie to you guys. Like, look, I've grown to respect Floyd Mayweather immensely since he retired. You know, I wasn't a big fan of his when he was fighting, but I've grown to respect him a lot because I understand how great he is now. But even him, if you go look at a lot of the fighters he fought in his career, he never really fought fighters who had equal or quicker foot speed than he had. You know, if you look at a lot of the fighters he fought, they were what we call in boxing slow, plodding fighters. Guys who like to come forward, throw big hard punches, which gives Mayweather, who has such great reflexes and such great defensive ability and timing, the ability to evade the punches, move to his left, move to his right. But he never really fought fighters who had equal or superior foot speed to him when they were in their prime. And that'd probably be my biggest criticism of his boxing career. You know? And because of that, I felt like that played a big role in him being able to go 49-0. Obviously, or 50-0. Obviously, Floyd Mayweather is an A-level fighter. He's a great fighter. He's one of the best fighters in the history of the sport. He's an all-time great. But because he got out undefeated, a big part of that was obviously his skills, but also it was him avoiding certain styles. A guy like Manny Pacquiao, a guy like another guy in boxing. His name was Paul the Punisher Williams. You know, a great welterweight in his time. Tall, lanky southpaw. Good hand speed, good foot speed, bigger than Floyd. Would have really given a lot of any welterweight in the world problems, and Floyd didn't fight him. You know, there was a guy that he called out at 154 that he said he was willing to fight when he was in his prime, and that was a guy by the name of Winky Wright. So Floyd fought at 147 pounds, which is welterweight, and there was a guy named Winky Wright who fought at 154. And this guy Winky Wright at the time was one of the best pound-for-pound fighters in the world. And Floyd called him out, and Winky Wright said he wanted to take the fight, and then Floyd backed off and reneged and said, "No, I'm not going to take the fight." So fighters, managers, promoters, they can avoid certain fighters or avoid certain styles because they just don't want to lose, or they don't want to fight that guy because there's a more easier opponent. And you know, and that's actually one of the other things about boxing that I find fascinating, is that boxing is a sport of free enterprise. You know, if these fighters, you know, don't have a pension or like a retirement plan or like a union, so I can't get mad at them for wanting to move in their best interests. You know, it's their career. As a boxing fan, I can have my gripes and criticisms, but I understand where they're coming from, because the fans aren't going to pay their bills when they're, you know, if they get brain damage or anything like that. So it's really the prerogatives up to the fighters. But to answer this question plainly and simply, no. Being undefeated doesn't make you the best fighter. Floyd wasn't the best fighter. Floyd isn't the best fighter of all time. Neither is Joe Calzaghe, because Joe Calzaghe is another one. You know, he was a fighter that beat some some good fighters. You know, the guys like Bernard Hopkins, guys like Jeff Lacey, guys like Roy Jones Jr. Fighters like that, like these come to mind. Mikhail Kessler, fighters like these come to mind. But even Joe Calzaghe, even the great Joe Calzaghe has some fights on his resume that you could say that he wasn't keen on taking because maybe the style wasn't conducive to what his strengths were in the ring and he wanted to go another route. Or maybe that there was a fighter that was a good fighter and was recognized as a fighter, but maybe that fighter didn't generate as much money because his name wasn't as big as, say, somebody else who had an easier style for him. So that happens a lot of times in boxing too. You might have a fighter that you might have a fighter who we call high risk and low reward, to where they're a difficult fight for you and they're not going to really give you the kind of money that, let's say, another fighter with a bigger name and a more in a style that favors your style more. And that's what happens a lot of times too. So I'm saying these things to explain to the newer boxing fans and people who don't quite understand that boxing has to be explained and understood. It has to be overstood so people can know what they're watching. And being undefeated doesn't make you the best fighter. Does it make you a great fighter? It can, depending on your opposition. If you fought, if the lion's share of your opposition is good, solid contenders and world level opposition, world ranked opposition, guys who came in there to come to win and didn't lay down just because you were a big name, then yes, you have a great claim to being a great fighter. Floyd Mayweather is a great fighter. Joe Calzaghe is a great fighter. Rocky Marciano, contrary to popular belief, was a great fighter. But neither of those guys I mentioned, even in their greatness, you can't really consider any of them the best, because of the fact that well, I can't really speak for Rocky Marciano, but even him, he's got criticism of his resume, and he's the only heavyweight to retire undefeated. So being undefeated doesn't make you the best. It can make you great, because listen, I don't care if you fight 50 bums. If you beat 50 bums, 49 bums, and let's say 4 or 5 of those guys were really good fighters, that's still pretty impressive, because even the best fighters of all time have lost to people they're not supposed to lose to. They fight down to the level of the opposition. Some names that come to mind are like recently Anthony Joshua, Andy Ruiz, maybe Buster Douglas, Mike Tyson. I mean, there's no greater example than that. Buster Douglas versus Mike Tyson. So boxing, no matter how great the fighter is, we've seen many times fighters fight down to the level of the opposition. So to get out undefeated is a rare feat. It's a great feat, but it doesn't make you the best. It doesn't make you the best. So I hope I explained that as good as possible, as well as possible, and as articulate as I possibly could. Let me know what you guys think in the comments down below. For my newer boxing fans out there, do you think being undefeated makes you the best fighter? And if so, explain to me why in the comments down below. And while you're doing that, make sure you take the time to subscribe. And like I say in every single one of these videos, you can love me or you can hate me, but I'm just a kid from Daniel. So until next time, take care, guys.